Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. So just to start with, as usual, I'm looking forward to answering any of your questions or reading your comments. And obviously I want to invite you to participate in the discussion so you can get the most out of it. Now, very often there are lots of discussions going on in the chat box, so if your question is important or if your comment is important, if you want me to read it, it might be difficult for me to find it, so please use my name or use the super chat feature, whichever is easier for you. So, codependency. Now, I think it's quite a complex subject, and we often associate codependency with only relationships. But I think that codependency itself, it has this internal aspect, so kind of relationship with ourselves, and the external aspect, and so obviously the relationship with other people. So I started with asking you guys in the comment box about what sort of characteristics of codependency is the most present in your life. So what sort of things about codependency you struggle with. I assume that it's something that you can't relate to, that's why you're here, because obviously the last room is about codependency. But if you're not, don't worry, there might be some aspects you might be able to relate to, because codependency is a very broad subject. So I thought as I said, I'm going to start with defining codependency. So on the external level, we know that codependency is associated with these relationships where we kind of enable the other person to continue with maybe negative behaviors, maybe addictions, maybe abuse, or anything that it might be bad for them. So in a way, it's like making someone dependent on us, right? That's kind of the core of codependency, where we create conditions where we sacrifice ourselves even to some extent, where we take care of another person to a point where we stop taking care of ourselves. So we create this kind of enabling relationship where we take responsibility for another human being, where we try to maybe even control them, control their lives, control their behaviors. So basically we assume this role where we feel like we are basically responsible for someone. And I think that codependency is not just present, or rather where we kind of struggle with codependency, where we are codependent people, right? Where we operate with this pattern of codependency when relating to other people. What happens is that it's not directed to just one person. It's not just present in one relationship, but basically we adopt this pattern and we use it to relate to other human beings, so anyone really. But usually it's most prominent in these intimate relationships. That's where that's why our codependency comes out most. So I said that, okay, there's this external element of codependency, but also I think most importantly, there's this internal one. So kind of our self-concept, self-identity, or simply relationship with ourselves. So what I mean by that is that you need to be a specific person with specific beliefs, with specific characteristics to be codependent, right? So I think that anything in life, anything that we do in life, it starts with ourselves basically. So whoever we are, what sort of values we hold, what sort of beliefs we hold, these are going to influence our relationships with other people. And of course there's this idea of our childhood really, so our relationship with our caretakers, so how we were treated as a child, how we were related to as children, right? So how our parents or caretakers treated us, how they related to us, and then our response to that. So basically through that relationship with our caretakers, we kind of start to interpret in our own way, right? That then serves as a template for future relationships. So as children, we start to make sense of that. How should we relate to other people? How should we relate to our parents to feel good, to feel loved, to get attention from them even, right? So, and obviously, doing all that things, responding to our parents, trying to get our needs met, will then influence how we relate to other people. So in most cases, this relationship with our parents, mothers especially, will be like a template for future relationships. So however we've been relating to our mothers, that mothers especially, because mother is the closest person in your life, whatever that relationship was like, whatever conclusions you drew from that relationship, so what sort of person you are, what you should be doing, how you should be treating other people, you're going to take it and then apply it in future relationships, especially romantic ones. So I'm not really getting any responses. There's not that many people today, so probably because I had to move this live streams to Fridays, at least for now. We'll see in the future. So ask you like what sort of aspects of codependency you struggle with, and what sort of are most prominent in your life. But all I'm getting is this weird comments from Abraham that are completely unrelated to the subject. Okay. So symptoms of codependency include things like, as I was saying before, sacrificing yourself to some extent, or doing things for other people to an extent where you are losing something, right? So it's not like you want to help other people, or it's not like you want to do something for other people, but it's more like taking responsibility for another person. So it's going kind of into extremes of helping another human being. It's not like you're just helping someone because you see them struggling or something like that, but it's more like taking responsibility for their actions, saying that if you don't rescue them, if you don't help them, it's gonna affect you on some level. So it's actually codependency. It's not so much about other people. We make it about other people. We feel that, okay, we have to rescue them, or we are responsible for them. But actually codependency, it's not so much about other people, but it's more about ourselves. So I'm gonna expand on this concept later on. I'm currently struggling with the opposite extremes, meaning codependency on one end and trying to be completely self-sufficient. Right, so there is this aspect of codependency where we can oscillate between these two extremes, where we either go into completely, into complete extreme of helping other people, rescuing them, sacrificing ourselves. But then we might start realizing that, oh man, I'm actually losing something. There's something missing. I shouldn't be doing that. That person doesn't care about me as much, right? Other people don't care about me as much as I care about them. So what's the point, right? So we might then move to this other extreme of so-called counter codependency, where we fight our urge to help other people, and where we rebel against this idea of codependency. So we might kind of oscillate between these two poles. And codependency can cause burnout, Mamu says. Yeah, exactly, because you're investing so much, you're investing, but there's not much focus on your own needs, right? So if you're not taking care of yourself, who's gonna do it, right? So very often codependents can have this idea that if they take care of other people, these people are gonna take care of themselves. So if I'm gonna help someone, I expect that they're gonna help me back. If I'm gonna take care of their needs, I expect they're gonna take care of mine. But it's rarely the case, right? It's rarely the case. That's why it's a problem, because we have this kind of expectations of others taking care of ourselves in a way. And then what happens is that we realize that it's not happening at all, right? So basically we can then oscillate, we can go back to this other point of trying to be super independent, self-reliant, avoiding asking for help from other people, avoiding, being in any way dependent on others, right? Because the moment we do it, it kind of triggers this fear that we're gonna lose ourselves, that we're gonna lose our resources, lose our energy. Robert says, it's not like living your own life. It's like not living your own life. Right, exactly, that is a good point. So basically, we are so oriented, so invested in other people's lives. We try to take so much responsibility for other people that we kind of forget about ourselves, about our own needs. So in a way, it is like living people's lives, but not our own. So we are very externally oriented, right? We live out there, but not being very connected with ourselves and our own needs. So obviously there are lots of consequences of living that way, of being codependent and investing so much in other people. So I think very often this kind of pattern of relating to others and relating to ourselves can be associated with kind of self-rejection, self-denial, where we deny our own needs, right? Where we when we are not very focused on what we want and what we like. And actually for many people, depending on severity, it might be difficult to find out what is it that we need or what is it that we want in the first place, right? And that is not only because we are so oriented externally and so invested in other people, but very often I think the core of this problem is actually having all these beliefs that if we don't help other people, if we don't sacrifice ourselves, or if we don't rescue them, or if we don't prioritize their needs, we're gonna be basically in a way seen as bad people. We're gonna be seen as, you can add any adjectives to that. Obviously it's gonna depend on your history, on what sort of beliefs you might be having, but regardless of the belief, regardless of the adjective that you might use, so I used here the common one, which is I'm bad. If I don't help someone, if I ignore them, if I don't take care of their needs, I'm a bad person. That's a very general one. And obviously, as with any kind of beliefs, what happens is that we're gonna start experiencing different emotions associated with this belief and with any kind of acting that triggers that belief. So for example, if we have a thought that, or maybe I'm investing too much into that relationship, maybe I need to spend more time on myself, maybe I'm losing my time, maybe I'm wasting my life in a way by being so oriented externally. Every time it happens, what happens is that we're gonna start experiencing different emotions such as guilt, anxiety, shame. But I think guilt would be the most common one. That's what usually keep us stuck in this pattern, because how can you focus on yourself if it's making you feel guilty, if you feel like it's a crime, right? If it's something that you expect to be punished for. That is obviously a pattern from childhood. So I'm just reading the comments. To what degree is it okay to be codependent, or should one be completely independent in relationship? Boltzmann's brain. So have you heard about the concept of interdependency? So basically interdependency is that you choose which aspects you want your partner in a way to be dependent on you, but also you depend on your partner. So it's basically an equal exchange, right? So for example, one of you let's say you need to clean a house. You're in a relationship and you need to clean a house, right? So with codependency, you're gonna do everything for that person. You're gonna do anything you can to make the life comfortable for that other person. But with independence, you're gonna be, negotiating a lot, and most likely you will try to get out of the relationship because you want to be independent. But with interdependency, it's like, okay, I'm gonna clean this room, whereas you're gonna clean the other room, right? So it's like you allow your partner to take care of some of your needs, whatever they might be, whatever would make your life easier, but you also agree to kind of take care of your partner's needs to some extent, as long as it doesn't compromise too much of your time or too much of your needs. So interdependence is this healthy exchange. That should be the ideal goal of any kind of relationship. With independence actually is quite opposite to codependency. Independency, as I was saying before, it's this idea of counterdependency, where we trying to prove to ourselves and to other people how self-reliant we can be, how independent we can be, how we can, we don't need other people. So it's, complete opposite of codependency. Nathan asks, I'm a rescuer. What can I do to become more independent? That's where we're gonna go into. That's the purpose of this live stream. So, as I was saying, there's lots of self-denial, self-rejection with codependency, but I think there's also this very important aspect where we, what is the actual reason of being codependent and investing so much into other people, right? I think it's a good question to ask ourselves when we try to break this pattern. What sort of things are we gaining from helping others? What sort of things are we gaining from kind of sacrificing ourselves or taking responsibility for another person's needs, or for their lives even, right? And I think this question actually can lead us to a place where we can realize really that with codependency and being, rescuing other people, sacrificing ourselves, taking care of others and their needs, it provides us with some sort of validation, right? Some sort of self-value, some sort of self-concept that makes us feel good. Oh, I'm this great person that helps other people. Oh, I can sacrifice myself. I'm a good person, simply, right? And obviously this kind of definitions will cause us to feel good about ourselves, right? So you see here how the codependency is not just a pattern of relating, but it's mostly a pattern of how we relate to ourselves. So it's not just about other people, but about gaining something, right? So when we are so invested in the external world, when we are invested into help other people, there's something that we are gaining, right? So it is a process of self-validation. It is a process of gaining some self-worth, because if we didn't help other people, if we didn't rescue them, we wouldn't feel worthy, right? We wouldn't feel good about ourselves. We wouldn't have that feelings of validation that we get through helping other people. So it's all kind of, in a way, you can see here that there might be actually, and I'm not sure if you're going to like it, but there might be actually some overlaps with narcissism. So narcissists, that's why kind of very often narcissists and codependents go so well together, because narcissists are oriented towards taking from other people, right? That's how they gain validation. That's how they gain self-worth, because they take. Whereas codependents, they gain their self-worth by giving to other people. So they're also externally oriented. And in both of these conditions, there is no internal validation. There is no kind of internal self-worth. both of these states depend on other people for validation. So in a way, it's not like codependents are not narcissistic, but it seems to be both of these conditions are basically in a way on the same spectrum, on the opposite poles, on the opposite extremes. So as I was right, so I'm just reading some notes, got a little bit confused. So I think with codependency there's this shadow side where we think we are so great, where we think that, you know, we are good people, where we feel like, you know, because we rescued so many people, because we want to help other people, right? We are so good and we are so great in a way. And this kind of creates a shadow, because any kind of condition, any kind of pattern, any kind of mental state will create a shadow, right? So what sort of shadow do you think there is to codependency, considering that codependency and narcissism might be on the same spectrum, on the opposite ends, and there might be some overlaps between these two conditions? Obviously, as I was saying, because codependents see only helping other people and only rescuing other people as a source of self-worth, so only doing things for others will provide the greatest sense of validation and self-worth. And that is associated with having this idea of being a good person and being, you know, taking care of other people. But what happens is that that's going to cast a shadow. And the shadow obviously here is that, if you think abstractly, the opposite to that is that you actually control other people, and you actually, you know, take away their willpower in a sense, or take away their determination. That would be one aspect. Another one is that you are not actually selfless, and you are not actually rescuing people, but you are actually doing it for yourself, for your own self-validation and self-worth. That would be the shadow of codependency. And I know it might be hard to swallow for some people, especially when your self-concept is so strongly connected to this idea of wanting to help and rescue others. But as I was talking in previous live streams as well about self-concepts and self-acceptance, the more attached you are to these ideas about yourself, the stronger shadow you're going to cast, and the less you will be able to see what sort of things actually come out of your unconscious when you're not paying attention. You just read some comments. So you mean it's important to validate oneself internally? Yeah, you need to. I literally just did a live stream on self-validation like 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago. I think it's a good one, and you can find lots of tips on finding a good source of validation. What if you feel you have little control of yourself in the heat of codependent situation because it boosts your sense of self-worth? It's almost addicting. It is addicting, yeah. Because each time you do it, each time you help other people, not out of your willpower, but as a kind of habit or a necessity, out of this impulse that pushes you to sacrifice yourself and take care of other people. It gives you this, it is addictive because it makes you feel good. It's like taking a drug, because I think very often what happens is that we lose this sense of self, right? So it's just like with drugs in a sense. We lose a sense of self, and we kind of give ourselves into this space or this dynamic of codependency. So I think these are the most kind of obvious characteristics of codependency. The last one I wanted to mention also is that the reason why we might feel in a way kind of lost in life or not having a purpose, not having a meaning, unless we are taking care of other people. I think very often there is this aspect of not feeling very motivated to do anything for ourselves. So once we remove ourselves from relationships, once we remove ourselves from opportunities to take care of other people, to take responsibility for others, to play that role of being a saint, of being a good person, we are left with nothing, right? Once we take it all, what's going to be left? What's going to be left is going to be lots of shame, right? Low self-worth, low self-esteem. Not knowing what is it that we are good at, not knowing what sort of skills we have, not knowing what we like or what we dislike. And I think that might be one of the challenging kind of byproducts of being stuck in different codependency patterns in our lives. Because once we remove them, what's going to be left, right? Where are we going to get our validation from? Where are we going to get our self-esteem or self-worth from? How do we know what is it that we need? What do we do with our lives or with our time when we are not taking care of other people, right? Any of these questions could be quite challenging for someone with codependency, because as I was saying, we depend on other people. That's why it's called codependency. It's not just one way, but we depend on other people for our sense of validation, self-worth, doing something in our lives, having some sort of directions. And once we remove that dependency, we are probably left with nothing, or with very challenging feelings that we need to address, actually, that we need to face in order to recover, because they require the most healing if we want to break these patterns of codependency. So I would imagine that if we kind of, as we describe this codependency, we know it's not healthy. We know that this pattern causes us to kind of miss on life, perhaps, or it causes us to feel disconnected from ourselves, so that we don't know where we are going. So obviously, what sort of goal would there be? Because if I tell you, oh yeah, you need to recover from codependency, that doesn't really tell you anything, right? So if someone wasn't codependent, right? If someone wasn't engaged in this codependency patterns, what sort of person would they be? What sort of traits or characteristics would they have? How would they relate to other people? And how would they relate to themselves? So what sort of image comes to your mind for someone who is healthy, who is free from this codependency patterns? Because we can't start our journey of recovery. We can't break any patterns if we don't know what the healthy is, if we don't know what the right ideal is, if we don't know what the goal is. How can we start changing if we don't know what behaviors are problematic and needs changing or replacing, and which behaviors are right? And I think very often for someone with codependency, that might be the biggest challenge on the path of recovery, because what is right? What is the goal? What should they change? That's been the pattern they've been operating through their lives. And also, the major reason why it's so confusing or challenging is because they lack this internal kind of voice guiding them towards the right path. There is very poor connection between, our awareness and ourselves, in a sense, when we're stuck in codependency. That relationship with ourselves, with our feelings, dislikes, is very often quite broken, because we are so oriented externally, we're so invested in other people that we are not really listening to ourselves. So that's why it might be quite challenging to define that goal, to define what sort of what healthy person is. How should we change to feel good? So how do you imagine someone or yourself without these codependency patterns. If you weren't codependent, what's the goal for you? If you wanted to be healthy, if you wanted to, feel good and be free from these codependency patterns. I'm gonna start first. So obviously, since we, as I was saying, there's a problem with self-esteem, self-validation, where we might depend on other people, where we depend on other people for our self-esteem and self-worth. But there's also a problem of not knowing ourselves sufficiently. I think that's the major one. So someone who wouldn't be codependent, they would have this stronger connection with themselves, with their feelings, with their emotions, with their beliefs or opinions. So basically, it's like kind of removing the energy or focus or attention from other people, at least partially, onto yourself. So instead of constantly being on a guard and trying to determine what's happening with other people around you, what they might need or how they might feel, you turn this attention back to you. How is it that you are feeling? How is it that what is it that you need right now, right? So it's kind of moving some units of attention from the external environment, from other people, onto yourself. I think that would be the major kind of definition of a healthy person who is free from codependency. So I see that I'm not really getting any comments related to this question of what the goal is, of what's, how would that person without codependency pattern look like, what sort of characteristics they would have. So that kind of makes me worried, because if you are on these codependency patterns, that kind of suggests that maybe you're not having any idea at all where to go. It kind of sucks, actually. So the first one is option of obviously paying more attention to yourself, listening more to yourself. But someone with codependency, and that depends actually on the perspective. Someone without codependency, sorry. So the problem for codependent people is that they have all these blocks, emotional blocks and beliefs that prevent them from being healthy. So what a healthy is for an average person, right, or for a psychologist, is not going to be very healthy for a codependent, because a codependent will see it as being a bad person. So for example, if I tell you that the majority of your time you should be spending on yourself, on focusing on your needs, right, on taking care of yourself, and kind of being a little bit selfish even, a codependent might see it as being super selfish or even narcissistic. So you can see here that codependency has all these beliefs that obstruct a codependent from being healthy and from being self-reliant and independent. And also there is this huge component of feeling guilty. So, for example, a common situation in which this codependency often comes out is when let's say we have a friend who often asks us for a favor. Can you do me a favor? Can you call someone? Can you bring me this? Can I borrow a book? Right? A codependent person, after a while, is going to start getting some anger, probably, or some discomfort from being put in this situation where we have to help another person. But because they have all these beliefs about not being selfish, or that saying no is wrong because then you are refusing to help other person, they can't say no, because the moment they say no, they're going to start feeling guilty for helping other person. So you see here that with codependency, the whole perspective is actually absolutely distorted. So obviously it might be difficult to determine what the goal is. What does the healthy person look like? What is right? How much can I focus on myself without hurting other people? So targeting these beliefs would be a first time in recovery. But actually before that, even before the before step, is defining this healthy state. So defining for ourselves what doesn't work for us right now, and what should be working, what would we want to feel like instead. So very often what's helpful is obviously asking other people, or working with a therapist, or anyone that you trust. So it's a little bit like, I mean, obviously it still places us in a position of being somewhat dependent on other people for validation or self-esteem, but it's very useful, especially if you're working with a therapist or someone you trust. So you need to determine which beliefs are not working for you, which beliefs are actually blocking you from being healthy. So that's on the external level. But on the internal level, I think what's super helpful, and that's going to tell you lots of information about yourself, is actually following your anger, right? So that's another part of the shadow of codependency. But like, once codependence explodes, I think there's lots of anger that could be expressed, and often can lead codependence to actually flip to this other extreme of being very self-reliant, very independent, or counter-dependent. When it's too much, that's where we can go into this other extreme. But before we go there, or while we are going to that other extreme, I think anger tells us lots of information. So I think if you are on a path of recovering from codependency, following your anger could be very helpful, because it tells you what's wrong, why are you being hurt, where you are being hurt, how you are being hurt, right? And it tells you what you don't want to tolerate anymore. So I know that anger might be associated with, maybe aggression or madness in a sense. But anger is very useful, especially for codependence, because it tells you what to pay attention to. So for example, if your friend starts annoying you with asking you for all these favors, follow your anger and start saying no, right? I mean, do you want to go along with guilt, or do you want to go along with anger? That tells you that your needs are being violated in a way, or you are being treated unfairly, or you are being hurt, right? Which one is more important? Something that you need to consider, and you need to put some value. Which one is more important, to follow your guilt and feel ashamed and feel restricted, or that your needs are violated, or follow your anger and start taking care of yourself? Something to consider. I feel like people will think I'm a bad person if I don't keep helping them, but I don't want to help them. So is it still codependency? Yeah, that's exactly codependency. That's exactly codependency. Because first of all, you have a belief that if you don't help other people, it means you're a bad person, which isn't entirely true. It might be in some situations. And second is that you're being in a conflict, basically. So you keep helping them, but you don't want to help them. So it's like being terrorized by this belief. You don't know if people are actually thinking that in the first place. You don't know if people are going to think that you're a bad person. Like, there's no way to check unless you ask them. And even if they do, most often than not, the reason they say that is because they are being selfish and they're not being codependent themselves, and they want to take something from you. So helping other people, it shouldn't be about your needs, or making yourself feel better, or helping, or kind of making go away certain thoughts or beliefs or opinions, right? So I'm going to help someone to be a good person or not be a bad person. If you do that, you're being codependent. You're not choosing to help other people. Helping others or rescuing in a healthy way, it should be your choice. You should choose it to do it, not for your own reason, but for the reason for another person. So I think in terms of like getting out of codependency, when you start helping others, when you feel like helping others, I think it would be very useful to investigate your motives behind wanting to help them. And if it's not purely about helping others, about making them feel good, it's codependency. I think that's the simplest I can say. So listening to yourself first, listening to your feelings and needs first, and then choosing what to do. So, it's not wrong, obviously, to get some validation on some positive feelings from helping others. But if it's like an addiction and you feel like you don't have any other choice, but you must help other people, you must spend your time, and you feel trapped, it's codependency. Hi Tarek, not sure if I pronounced it right. Hi, are attachment styles and codependency correlated? Let me think. There might be, but so I think that generally attachment styles I'm personally not a big fan of this theory because I think like our attachment styles can be very flexible and depend on the context and depend on the relationship. But in terms of codependency, when a person is in that codependency pattern, there might be some abandonment issues. So there might be separation anxiety. So you could call it, I think it's called anxious attachment style. So basically we stay with the other person because we are scared of being by ourselves. So if we get separated, if we stop rescuing them, we're gonna experience that separation anxiety. But then if we start, or if we kind of flip to this counter dependency, we might go into avoidant attachment style, where we avoid relationships with other people because we are fed up with helping them and wasting our time and energy on them. So I think in terms of correlation, probably these two would be the most related. All right, so we can see here that with codependency, it's all about kind of placing yourself first, learning how to place yourself first, how to listen to your feelings, how to know yourself, how to turn the attention from other people. So it's kind of learning how to be comfortable with yourself when you're by yourself. So I think solitude is really, really helpful. So learning to be with yourself where you are away from people, when you're not feeling obligated that you need to help others. Right? So it's all about kind of gaining self-knowledge. And in a way, I think it's also learning to be selfish in a way. I'm using this term only because codependents can, I think for codependent selfishness, there's a very, anything self-related could be selfish very easily for codependents. So basically, if I decide to now, for example, instead of calling my friend or calling my parents, if I decide to bake a cake for myself, that's selfish from a codependent perspective. But from a more healthy, more balanced perspective, it's not that selfish. It's, you're making choices. You are responsible for yourself, right? You are choosing to have a cake first. And then if you want to, you can call your friend, or you can call your parents, or do something nice for someone else. So as I was saying, this perspective, from, in a way, codependents have this perspective on themselves and what is selfish kind of distorted, right? It's very imbalanced. So they have to be saints, they have to be good people, they have to sacrifice themselves, otherwise they are selfish. So kind of identifying our beliefs around selfishness and focusing on ourselves and focusing on our needs can be very helpful. So common beliefs could be that if you say no, you're a bad person. If you refuse help, you're a bad person. If you don't spend enough time with your friend, you're a bad person. If you don't spend enough energy on doing favors for your friends, you're a bad person. So all sort of things, when you start paying attention in your life, all sorts of situations where your guilt is being triggered, pay attention to what sort of beliefs come up. And then you need to start questioning these beliefs. You need to start looking for an actual evidence whether it's true. And if you're not sure, find a therapist or someone you trust and brainstorm ideas. You could do it with your friend, but it has to be someone you trust, obviously. And ask them, hey, do you think that if someone refuses help in such a situation, are they a bad person? You don't even have to make it personal, but you need to dismantle all these beliefs and correct your perspective, your distorted perspective, because codependency kind of messes with your whole perception in a way of yourself and other people. And I think obviously that kind of turning inwards also goes hand in hand with kind of stopping being responsible for other people. And I think that's a big one for codependents as well. We assume this responsibility for the well-being of others. Or if I don't help them, they're gonna feel very bad. If I don't help them, their life is gonna get ruined, right? So you see here that the shadow side again is kind of narcissistic, because we place ourselves on this pedestal of a belief that we are this great person and that we are capable of rescuing people. But are we really? Are we really? So kind of taking this responsibility from others and turning it into ourselves. So what can you control in your life? Can you really control how the other person is feeling? Can you really control how they react to you? Right? And are you really responsible for their well-being? To some extent, yes, we have this influence over others, right? We can influence their mood. We can we can upset someone, or we can make them sad. But we are not responsible for what they do with that feeling, or how they react to us. We can't control it, right? So turning that responsibility onto ourselves. So what can we control? Can we control how we talk to others? Can we control our own responses or our own reactions? Can we control our own feelings to some extent, right? And what about, can we control behaviors of other people? Can we control whether someone takes care of our needs or our feelings or our well-being? So kind of learning to distinguish between what we can and what we can't control, super helpful in breaking these patterns of codependency. And I know that one of the challenges of doing that is, as we were talking about the attachment styles, there might be anxiety coming up once we start separating ourselves from other people, because essentially breaking the pattern of codependency is separating ourselves from others. It's creating boundaries, right? It's about getting clear of where your person starts and where it ends. So that's why it's kind of important to take responsibility for ourselves and withdraw, taking responsibility for others because you set these boundaries. All right, I'm not responsible for that person. I can't control their feelings. I can't control their behaviors or reactions. But that can create lots of anxiety because you're not used to that state. You are used to being merged or kind of fused with other people and meshed in different relationships. Not just, it might not be just very intimate ones, but very often it's fusing ourselves with just anyone really who comes in contact with us and who also has poor boundaries. So creating this separation, turning focus onto ourselves can bring some anxiety for some people. So it's something that I think we need to be mindful of and we need to face. It's something that we need to embrace and look straight into the anxiety. What is it really about? And is it really true? Because very often the anxiety is telling us that we are not capable, or that we cannot take care of ourselves, or that we need other people in our lives. Otherwise we are worthless. But is it really true? So again, looking for beliefs, looking for facts associated with this state and counterfacts. So is there an actual evidence that we are not capable? Is there an actual evidence that we cannot exist on our own, by ourselves, on our own? So looking straight into this anxiety, not avoiding it, I think is another element of breaking this codependency patterns. I feel like the 4 schizoid splits described in another of your video is a source of my issue. I'm more out of the slave persona and in the exile right now. Actually, I think that schizoids can be very prone to being codependent, to being in this kind of master-slaves relationships. And the reason for that is, I think, obviously because they're kind of disconnected from themselves. So they dissociate this kind of space out and they don't take sufficient care of themselves. So in a way, it's like, again, it kind of comes back to fusing ourselves and meshing ourselves with other people, connecting. It's actually not connecting, it's actually losing ourselves in relationships. And what schizoid wouldn't like that, right? So essentially, it's the ultimate loss of self, which can be very addictive. I'm not saying that, it's a sign or trait, or characteristic or symptom of being schizoid, but I think there's a huge potential for schizoid being on the codependent spectrum. It requires a lot of effort in my case, having to go through memories to pinpoint the origin of our beliefs. Well, the thing is that I think that you don't always have to go and become an archaeologist and go and investigate all the causes of your beliefs. It can be very time consuming. Some people spend years in therapy to examine all the causes of all their beliefs and then try to change them. What you can do instead is take a belief and make a list of evidence confirming that belief, and then make a list of evidence disproving that belief, right? And then focus on the evidence that disproves this belief, which will then help you to construct a replacement belief. So for example, if you believe that I always have to help other people otherwise I'm a bad person, right? Look for evidence. Ask your friends, ask on anonymous forums, like how true that is. Am I a really bad person? Because being bad, it's a very subjective thing. It's an opinion. It's an evaluation. And it's not very objective, tangible thing, right? And then, based on these investigations, you will be able to actually construct a lot of evidence that disproves this belief. So actually, maybe you're not a bad person because it's not a very valid evaluation. It's not very objective. It's very subjective. It depends on the perspective, right? One person will tell you that, yeah, you're a bad person. Another person will tell you, no, you're not, right? And then you will also notice that actually it might be a very blown out of proportion belief, right? So something that doesn't have a lot to do with the reality, right? So then you start changing that belief. You could replace it with, yes, for some people, I might seem like a bad person, but these people might be very unhealthy as well, right? They might have their own motives. They might have their own motives to maybe exploit me in a way. Or they might have just different morality. So I might be bad in certain contexts accordingly to these people, right? But in the bigger picture, that adjective doesn't define me. So I'm not this. I'm not just this bad person, right? There is more. I have a reason for acting in a specific way. If I focus on myself more, I can actually help other people in a better way. Because if I take more responsibility for myself, for my well-being, right? And I'm not clouded by my own needs for validation or self-esteem or self-worth, then I can be in even better service to others, because then I'm actually capable of being more altruistic and more focused on other people. So there is a little incentive for your codependence. You can actually help other people better if you take care of yourself more. Codependent with my cat, with your cat. How does someone safely investigate the genesis of their beliefs on their own? So as I was saying, break it down. Journaling helps. Break it down into little beliefs. So take one belief at a time, right? Otherwise, it's gonna become too overwhelming. And then kind of meditate on that belief. If you really want to find the causes, meditate on that belief. What might be helpful also is to kind of think about, or allow yourself to kind of imagine your childhood, right? So when you think about the specific belief, specific thought, specific opinion you have about yourself or life in general, what sort of memories does it bring up? And then you just go along with these memories. Is there anything else? So, as I was saying, kind of examining your beliefs, questioning your guilt. Is it really wrong to focus on your own needs, right? Just keep questioning it every day until you start becoming more and more comfortable by focusing on yourself. And also, as I was mentioning before, following your anger can be very helpful. I don't mean, going on rampage and destroying people's lives and following with every single impulse that your anger is bringing up. But it's more like listening to it. What does it tell you about this situation? What does it tell you about yourself? What does it tell you about your own needs? Because usually when we get angry, it means that we are being treated unfairly, that something in our life is out of balance, that we are not taking care of ourselves. I think in a very easy thing to imagine related to that is basically imagining a little child. When the child doesn't get their toy, they get angry, they throw a tantrum. We are just like that as adults. When we don't get what we want, what we need, we're going to start irritated. So codependents can either very often ignore that feeling, or they go into extreme and they act on the anger and can be very mean people actually. And so kind of related to the shadow side. So in terms of breaking the pattern, listening to that anger and going along with this. So if some particular person or dynamic angers you, or situation angers you, how can you change it? How can you change it so it's the way you want it to be, or the way it enables you to meet your needs in a sense? In what way are you being treated unfairly? What sort of things are you ignoring in yourself? Are you doing something that you dislike doing, for example? So that's what I mean by following the anger, right? Not going on, pattern of destruction and whatever that might be. And then I think lastly, as I was saying, there's this aspect of what you can and cannot control, guilt, anger. But also I think it's very important to kind of examine where can you get an alternative source of self-worth? How else? What's the alternative way of feeling good about yourself that is not related to other people, that is not related to sacrificing yourself? Thank you, Nihil Thornberry. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Sorry if I didn't. So as I was saying, whoops, I lost my train of thought. Following your anger, guilt, listening to your needs, focusing on what you can and cannot control, but also, the alternative way of finding a self-worth and validation. So codependence, as I was saying, there's this sense of feeling good about yourself if you help other people, if you sacrifice yourself, if you get lost in relationships or in this kind of role of a helper or a rescuer. What's the alternative way of getting that boost? What's the alternative way of feeling good about yourself, right? Could there be actually a positive feeling or a sense of accomplishment from taking care of yourself, from taking care of your needs, from paying attention to your likes, or what is it that you want in your life? Thank you, Tremend. So how can you get the alternative confidence and security that is not related or not dependent on other people? So it kind of comes back again to the subject of validation I was talking about in the last live stream. So how can you get this internal sense of validation that is not so much dependent on other people, that is not dependent on sacrificing yourself, right? But it's dependent on actually doing nice things for yourself or accomplishing things for yourself. So kind of connecting with our needs, right? I mean, doesn't it feel good when you take care of your needs? Doesn't it feel good when you spend time on cultivating this well-being for yourself that is not related to other people? Obviously, I'm not saying that you need to completely abandon helping others or abandon other people or the society. That's the other opposite spectrum of codependency. But it's kind of shifting the focus more onto yourself and spending more time on yourself rather than on others. So I'm gonna close on that. I know obviously it's a very extensive subject, and I did try to compress it as much as I could, and there's much more to say. There's much more to, many more strategies you could do to break this pattern of codependency. But I did try to focus on kind of key areas, key things that we could start doing to change. If you do have any more questions, you are free to obviously drop them in the chat box. I will be happy to answer them. Thank you so much for obviously participating today. It's been a quite challenging subject for me as well, and I've been very nervous for some reason, which is not very usual for me, since I've been doing this live streams for a few times already, and the only time I was so nervous was the first time when I did the live stream. So something worth to examine for me. Where is this nervousness is coming from? It's probably because I'm breaking my own patterns of codependency as well. And for me, it's a little bit like codependency is a little bit like living with maybe insulin resistance or being diabetic. So it's not something that will ever go away or completely go away, but it's something that you need to deal with, something that I need to deal with in my life, probably for the rest of my life, which is fine. Yes, Baron, these are regular. I used to do them on Saturdays, but for now I will be doing them on Fridays. I had to change because I've been rearranging my schedules lately. So I hope Fridays work also for you. And yeah, it's in most Fridays. I can't guarantee it's every single Friday. Sometimes I take some times off, but yeah, it's Fridays, same time. So 8 p.m. UK, whatever it is for your time zone. Okay, guys. So can't see any other questions. Again, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you next Friday. And the last thing before I forget, if you'd like to continue with the discussion on codependency or any other subject, you can now join my Discord community. So it's a public community. There are already some people joining. There are some interesting discussions going on. I'm still in the process of developing it and making it better. But yes, if you want to continue this discussion on this subject, join us on Discord. Thank you again. Take care of yourself and see you next time.